So for the next 45 minutes, we want to talk a bit about our learnings, but to first understand who is sitting here, maybe do a short show of hands. Who would describe him or herself more as an engineer? Okay, more like management, business. Okay, good, 50-50, great. Because this is really for both. Like I want to talk about that. And another question is, who of you actually has decoupled sites running in production? Okay, a couple, good. And the other ones are all thinking about it and eager to play around. Who is super scared and actually doesn't want to be here? Nobody? Good, okay. All right. Yes, so who are we? Today I'm going to talk about from a different perspectives. One of them is going to be from the perspective of Amazing Labs. Amazing Labs is a Drupal agency since Drupal 6, so quite some time ago. Today we are roughly 46 people, and it changes almost every day now. And we have people all over the world. So we have teams that build, and we have teams that manage Drupal sites. And pretty much at any time, you will find somebody that helps you if you have a problem with your site, but also if you decoupled sites. Then, as a second point of view, I want to talk from an Amazee.io point of view. That's around 12 people, and we are doing the hosting part. So the sites that are built are then later on hosted on our infrastructure. And you will see later that decoupled brings a lot of challenges. And we're going to talk a bit about these. Again, Amazee.io is all over the world. You can see that's actually 24/7. So because hosting runs 24 hours, we have people that are online over the weekend as well. Yes. And who am I? Well, my name is Michael Schmidt. I'm the CTO of the whole thing. You can find me at michael@amazee.com, or in the Drupal community, everybody pretty much knows me as Schnitzel. That's my username. Cool. Let's do a bit history. So until 2016, we pretty much did Drupal only. We were the standard Drupal agency that you can find anywhere else that built Drupal sites with Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 at that time. We had front-end developers, back-end developers. The back-end developers did all the PHP coding. The front-end developers did mostly theming, so with Twig or PHP template, depending on 7 or 8. We had some JavaScript in there was a lot of jQuery happening, things like that. So the default thing that what you would describe as a Drupal agency. And from the hosting point of view, again, we just hosted PHP. We had PHP sites, big and small. Some of them had a couple of hits per day, others had thousands of hits per second, but again, very focused on Drupal. And then the first React project came. It actually didn't come as a React project. It came to us as a customer wanting to have 12 different front ends, but one content editor experience. If you're interested in learning more about that, I actually gave presentations about that as well. How we decided to do React, how we decided that this is the time that we're gonna try a decoupled project. And we tried. And there were a lot of good things, there was a lot of bad things. We tried to share most of our experience, we really tried to share with the community. And yeah, so if you're interested in that, go. I'm happy to send you some links about that. But as of today, so 3 years later, we have multiple decoupled sites in production. Some of them rather small, some of them huge. They run businesses, they run media companies, they have breaking news, all these kind of things. So we run, some of them are fully decoupled. We're going to hear the term later how that works. We started with React, but today we have React Vue and Gatsby projects very soon. So we can also see that we extended and don't just focus on one specific tool. But we also done a couple of progress decoupling, which we're also going to see later how that works. But one thing that is really strongly in all of that, we are using GraphQL. We maintain the GraphQL module ourselves. Some of our employees are doing that. We really believe in GraphQL. I know there's a lot of chase. People always think there's a fight between JSON API and GraphQL. I don't think so. At the end, it achieves a goal. We just stuck with GraphQL because we really liked it, and so that's a bit the base that we use. And yes, we still build Drupal-only sites. So it doesn't mean that everything we do today has to be decoupled. It's definitely not. We always look at the project and decide, okay, does it make sense to use fully decoupled, progressive decoupled, or maybe Drupal only? So let's look at the decision between fully versus progressive, and let's understand a bit what this actually means. So if you go fully decoupled, this means you have no Drupal frontend at all anymore. You implement the frontend in some other system. While the progressive decoupling means you still have a Drupal frontend, and you replace that frontend in some of the pieces of the website. You replace it with some kind of technology that we're going to see where it is needed. So it's either completely removed or only partially removed. So this means for the fully decoupled, we heard no Drupal anymore on the front end. Important though, the Drupal editor interface is still existing. So the editor still goes in and can still edit the page. The problem is the preview. So the preview that usually happens on the front end, now Drupal has no front end anymore, so now how does all of this work? So there's already the first thing. But from a technology point of view, you basically have some kind of other front end, can be React, Vue, Angular, Gatsby, whatever it is out there, there's a lot of different technologies, that talk to Drupal via an API. That right now you have the choice between JSON API, which landed in core, that is in Drupal core, or GraphQL, which is a module that you just install. But they basically expose an API, so a machine-readable way for these front ends to talk to the Drupal to get the content out of it. And the content then is styled by the front end and is shown by the front end. Important though is you need to think about SEO and also accessibility. So the front end that is actually running in the browser of the user, a search engine usually cannot interpret that. So you need some system to tell a search engine or a machine-readable system or a Braille reader or any other tools. You need to provide them, and so you need some server-side rendering. I'm not going to go too deep into technology here. Again, I did presentations about that as well, but you need to worry about these things, because just a decoupled system without any server-side rendering, you will have a very, very bad experience for the search engines and also screen readers. And the other important thing, the other important thing is every interaction that we know from Drupal needs to be implemented again. So in Drupal, it's very easy. You have a blog post and you want to have a comment section at the bottom. You just say comment CS, done. With decoupled, there is no such thing anymore. So you need to implement, the comments need to be implemented. Any views functionality, let's say you have views that you can filter or you can page or all these things, all of that is gone. This needs to be re-implemented. Web forms, super easy to create a form, is not there anymore. And I don't want to scare people here. It's more like we need to understand this, that it is gone. Now what's happening over the last years is that many companies stepped up and said, okay, when we build it once, we build it for the whole community. So a lot of these features, you can now still download modules and install them and they will work out of the box. But it's not just something that in Drupal you enable and done. It's different. And another important thing is you have then two development streams because there are two different technologies. You have the front end, which is most probably built in JavaScript, and you have the back end, which is built in Drupal, so PHP. So you have two different streams. This means you can have two completely different teams, which in sometimes can be a huge time saver and bring a lot of performance or improvements. But also it means you have two different technologies. You have two different build stacks and things like that. Now let's look at the progressive decoupled. So the progressive decoupled means you still have a Drupal frontend. It's still a regular Drupal site, but only some parts of the website are actually built with JavaScript. Again, you can choose what type of JavaScript or which frameworks you want to use. So that can be React, Vue, Angular, whatever. It can also still be jQuery. Technically, if you do some stuff with jQuery, you could also declare it as progressive decoupled, but probably a lot of people just use more of the modern ones. And then the data, still you use an API on the Drupal side, JSON API or GraphQL, that then comes and that tiny application within the whole Drupal site consumes that data. The cool thing is you don't need to re-implement Drupal if it's not needed. So if you want to still use all the functionality of comments and web forms and all that stuff, you can still use all of that, and only a specific part can be used. On the other side, though, the problem is that the complexity, because now suddenly you have two systems that usually are built to be independent. So you have the Drupal frontend that handles all its CSS, its styling, its theming, and then you have, let's say, React that can also handle its CSS, its styling, its theming. You clash these two tools together and say, okay, now be happy together. And that can cause issues. So you have issues on CSS styling, you have build system, things like that. So it's not the one-shot solution. It's really only the solution when you have a regular Drupal site and you just want to make some parts like interactive. Then it can help a lot. But you also create yourself a lot of issues. So the decision here is not very easy. And we actually, through the history, we went through that quite some often. And that was one of the harder ones. Because the other problem is, it's not very easy to start fully decoupled and then decide, oh, now let's do progressive or the other way around. So it is a decision that you probably need to do quite early of a project. But it's over time you will understand, okay, when does which one make more sense? Okay, so after we know now between fully decoupled and progressive decoupled and the Drupal only that we all probably know, I want to talk about 4 things that we mostly learned in the last 3 years. That's the skill set, about specific projects, about clients, and the future that we see where we are getting dragged to and where we see the whole Drupal community also going to. Okay, the skill set. So in 2016, we had Drupal agencies, we had people that did backend, we had people that did frontend, but nobody really ever built full JavaScript systems. So the first thing we did, and we're really lucky that we decided to do that, we decided we want to train our developers, and not only the front-end people, and not only the back-end people, but we said we're going to train every single developer. Because with Decoupled, we will see later, the boundaries between front-end and back-end starts to be very blurry, or completely dissolve altogether. So we said we want to train every single developer, and we did it in different ways. So we did in-house JavaScript workshops first, where we just talked about modern JavaScript. And then we talked about React on top. Because the first thing we had to do is first explain people, or our engineers, our developers, how modern JavaScript development worked. And we did that with external trainers. So we brought external trainers in for 1 week. We basically closed shop for 1 week, and we did training for every single person in there. Everybody built their own React app in that first week. We also did code camps. So we sent people to events that specifically are for there. So there are code camps all over the world happening where trainers bring together people. A lot of times it's at the sunny beach. This time I think it was in Las Palmas in Spain, where they brought together people. They did the same, just in another environment. But we also did a lot of internal training. So after we started to onboard these first people, you saw we are a global company, we cannot bring everybody to an office, and it's not that easy. So after we trained the first people, we flew these people around, and they trained other people in other locations. So there was a long time of just training people, getting them on board, and also understanding that everybody learns in different ways. Some people you can explain them and they get it. Other people, they actually need to go in and write code. So be mindful around how people learn. And that also a lot of these things was scary. A lot of people were scared about the new world that we're getting in. Yes, we had a lot of people who were very excited, but there's a whole spectrum existing. So what did we learn through that? Well, first of all, today's JavaScript is not the JavaScript we knew about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It looks very different. We have modern development tools. It's not just, oh, I just do some jQuery $ brackets and take my stuff and change it a bit. It's really, really proper programming. And so that is all needs to be learned. And what I said before, front end now, it's not just CSS, HTML, and jQuery. Front end today is actual logic. While in the past with Drupal, the front end did not include a lot of the logic stuff. So like deciding how something looks like, or parsing data, modifying data, all of that always happened in the back end in PHP. And then the front end just displayed it. But now, today, the front end can actually be all the logic, the routing, the menu handling, what opens when, which button is showed at which point because the user has that role, then I show this button. All these things, these logic implementations, they can now happen on the front end. And they most probably should happen on the front end because there it's much faster because it's happening in the browser. The browser can do it directly. It doesn't always have to talk to the server and say, hey, server, do I need to show that button? Yes or no? And then the server thinks about it and maybe decides to send an answer back. It all happens in there. So now suddenly, the backend now works in the front end. And this is definitely something we see today. Backend developers, if we want to still use that term, even though we try to use less and less these labels because they don't really make sense anymore, they now work in PHP and also in the JavaScript. And the front-end developers, they still do styling and all that kind of things, but they now have access to all the logic implementation. So these lines start to blurry. And one of the things we do, we have teams of like 5 to 6 engineers that work together, that are composited of more front-end skilled people, more back-end skilled people, but together as a team, they solve problems. They together sit at one table, they look at the requirement of the customer, and the teams themselves decide how they split it up. So there is not an architect that sits there and says, that part is going to be done by that person, that part is going to be done by that person. It's the team together. And so you have sometimes a back-end developer that writes some CSS, or the other way around. But it's one team that every code that goes out is peer-reviewed, is code-reviewed. Now we also start to add tests to everything. And with all these things in there, it doesn't really matter anymore what the person's job profile is. Important is that the team together solves problems and delivers things for the customer. The other thing we saw is now suddenly we do hiring. So on one side, hiring gets more complicated because we now not only hire Drupal people, but we now hire Drupal people that also know React. And I can tell you, they're unicorns and hard to find. So on one side, it gets more complicated because the amount of people that we can hire, we don't have just Drupal people anymore. Everybody that comes in and joins as a Drupal developer, they will need to learn JavaScript as well. And not many people have done this already. So that's one thing, which is probably the negative thing. But the positive thing is we now have access to a huge amount of JavaScript engineers. People that don't even need to know Drupal, that are with the skills of being a JavaScript engineer, knowing JavaScript, they can build the logic, they can build the front end and all that stuff. And the back end stuff, where the data is coming from, that can still be done by another team. And I can tell you there are many, many, many JavaScript engineers out there. Many, many schools start now to teach JavaScript from the very beginning. They ditch Java as their main language and jump over to JavaScript. Why? Well, it's first widely much more used and it's easier to learn because it runs in your browser. No need to install any JVE or whatever. You can learn it in the browser. And if you look currently, if you like Stack Overflow does always they do developer surveys, JavaScript is always on top of the language that everybody wants to build. So the other thing is, engineers started to contact us. They see that we started to teach everybody of our engineers about this. And they see this and they come to us and say, hey, I don't have any Drupal knowledge yet. I don't have any JavaScript knowledge yet. I'm a good Drupal developer, but my company does not want to jump on the JavaScript train. Can I join you so you can train me? That happens multiple times that people come to us. So suddenly, hiring also gets easier again because people start to talk to us. They want to join. They want to learn more. And the same is also about retaining employees. there's always this big, especially if we find these unicorns, how do we keep these people with us? And of course, you cannot force them. There are sometimes reasons that people want to leave, and that's perfectly fine. But what we also see is that engineers, they seek new challenges. After they have done a lot of PHP stuff for 5-6 years, we have engineers that were probably our best PHP engineers. They said after 5-6 years, you know what, I feel like there's nothing more. I'm at the edge of the possibility. So now these are one of the best JavaScript engineers because they saw in JavaScript a new opportunity, a new challenge, and they really want to learn these things. So teaching your existing employees also can be a way to keep them with you, to keep them happy, to help them increase their knowledge, their resume, and yeah. So overall, there are two sitting here. So I would say what I'm hearing is overall we are very, very happy with the decision that we took. We just heard it from before as well. We hear it from others that finally the projects make sense. It makes sense for engineers to split up the front end and the back end. From a logical point of view, this makes a lot of sense to separate the content from structure and all these things. In engineers' mind, that's where the heaven is, that's where it makes sense. So overall, developers are happy. Now let's talk about the project, because we still need to do some things. So the biggest question we had at the beginning is, okay, who actually pays all of this? Because I can tell you it's an investment. We're going to talk some numbers later. It's not cheap to teach all your engineers. It's not cheap to send them to Spain to learn JavaScript. It's not cheap to fly people all over the world. And it's also not cheap to learn anything new. So we were very lucky, and I'm fully aware that this is maybe not the case for everybody. Luckily, the project we had in 2016, the customer was very, very aware that we are going in uncharted territory. And they were open to pay to share the costs of this challenge. They understood that what we're doing now is going to be how they develop in the next 10 years. So they had budget themselves for us to play. They had budgets to try out things, to refactor things. The customer is a very, very technical customer that has done development over the last 10 years themselves. They went through all kind of things, and I'm fully aware that not every customer is like that. But it was really, really great to work together with the customer in a very close environment and learn all these things. The other thing is, your investment will continue over time. It's not that like you teach everybody once and then everybody knows React and done. As you saw, we are now starting doing Vue. We're starting doing Gatsby. We're starting doing other things. So it's not just something that you invest once and then it is. That it will continue over time. We continued over 3 years. We continued investing into our employees, into new things and stuff like that. The other thing I mentioned before is the hosting part. You need, if you want to do it proper with SEO and accessibility, you need server-side rendering. And that was actually the cause why Amaze.io decided to re-implement their whole infrastructure. Because we realized that just slapping a little bit of JavaScript in the code, what we thought first what the case is, it is not the case. Now we have containerized solutions which run node servers. So basically what you do, you have a little piece on the server that runs your Drupal, and you also have a piece that runs the node. These are two different servers, but together they work and show the website to the customer. It is possible with just doing it with the PHP stuff, but if you want good accessibility and SEO, you will need the node server. So think about that. Think about when you start doing it, okay, how do I actually host this? Does my current hoster support this? Will they charge me much more if I also want to run a node system? The other question is also, you can run, what we first thought is, okay, we just run all the node stuff on hoster A and all the Drupal stuff on our current hosting solution. But then you need to deploy it together and you need to coordinate these things. So it's a lot of stuff to think about how you actually run these things. Now, 3 years ago, this was very hard because it didn't really exist. Today, hosting companies have existing solutions, they help you, they have documentations, examples, code, stuff like that, how all of that works. But it's not just, you cannot just go to your current Drupal hoster and say, oh, I'd also do Decoupled. That's going to be painful. Okay, the next thing, with any new thing, expect failure. And expect failure really, really hard. We don't have enough, or I don't have exact numbers, but I can tell you that we probably invested $500,000 over the last 3 years. And that's probably on the lower side of money. Because, so we had, first of all, we had investment directly in it. So we did these trainings, we did all of that. But we had many failed projects, or we had many failed parts of projects, where the engineers estimated it's going to take 3 days, and it took 30, because it was with something we've never done. It's something that we have never been at. It's something that we have never used. You read the documentation and it makes all sense, and then you realize, oh, yeah. Expect this to happen, and please allow your teams to fail. If you expect them to be perfect from the very beginning, you're going to make you unhappy, the engineers unhappy, and mostly the customers unhappy as well. So allow the teams to fail. Add buffers in however you can. Add them in it, in budgets, in timings, and stuff like that. And also, and I think that's the next important thing, if you fail, we paid the price, and that's okay. But now, let's look at it as an investment and use them as a chance. Use them as a chance for the teams themselves to get better with retrospectives. We do them almost religiously. We do retrospectives where we talk about how did the last sprint or the last 2 weeks or the last 4 weeks, whatever length of development time you have, and let everybody speak there. What went good, what went bad, what do we want to make better? You already lost the money. You can't get that back, but you can use that for the future, and also share learnings. Don't, like, I think the worst is if these teams would suddenly start to compete against each other. Have an open communication between these teams. So if one team makes a huge mistake and loses money, or loses even a customer, loses a project, whatever it is, allow them to share, stand behind it, and also for others to learn about it, and to hopefully maybe not make the same mistake again. And the last important thing, celebrate successes. And I think I cannot stress that enough. I don't think we do it enough. It's so easy to finish a project that takes hours, or maybe people need to work through the night, and then you release and you go live, and the next project is already waiting on the end. And we never actually celebrate together. So celebrate these successes, invest money in these celebrations. Like the $5,000 that it's going to cost for the whole team to have a party is going to make the team so much more happier, and it's going to be really good invested $5,000, even though it's maybe instead of 500,000, it's 505,000. Just allow the teams to celebrate and to really come together and say, okay, we built something, and now we go stronger out into the next. The next thing is, well, as I said, is we now do projects more than just React. So we have started a project with Vue. As mentioned, we're starting to look into Gatsby. And one of the biggest things that for me is that the JavaScript, we know from the Drupal community, yes, there is the PHP community, but we don't exchange a lot of things. Like, I don't think there's probably a WordPress engineer here, even though we do exactly the same. We do it with the same tools, we use the same language, and we are both open source. So there should be a lot of exchange, because we could learn a lot from it together. But somehow the PHP community, they want to keep their own thing. That's very different in the JavaScript community. The JavaScript community made it possible that they are really close together. There's all the time, there is exchanges between Vue, React, and Angular, and Elm, and whatever else is out there. There's a lot of exchange. So it's not, if you try to compare like the difference, let's say, from React and Vue, if you compare it to Drupal and WordPress, that's a big mistake. They're much closer together in terms of community, but also in terms of code, like how things work. So if you learn React, you mostly learn modern JavaScript with some specific React things on top. But all this modern JavaScript you can also use in Vue, and you can also use in Angular and everywhere else. So it's much easier to use another tool inside the JavaScript world than it is like in the Drupal world. But of course, also think about it. Like, it's not just if you suddenly use Vue and none of your engineers suddenly have ever used it, then you have a problem. Like, we have a team, as mentioned, that does that maintains the websites only, and they maybe have never seen the project, that they now suddenly need to fix something in there. And now if it's built with Vue, but these people have always used React, they might not be able to help. So think about it, when do you jump to a new project, and make sure again that all of your team knows how these roughly works and how that is. So that's something that has to happen. Okay, let's go over to the clients. Interestingly for us is that a lot of the clients wanted decoupled. And it's maybe something that has to do with our company size, or maybe with the type of companies. Right now, most of the projects we do are rather bigger ones, so we talk around like $200,000-$300,000 budgets and more, up to $1 million, $2 million. And there, decoupled is already requested, because these companies in there, they understand all the positive things that decoupling brings them. But just even though they want it, even though they send you in the first email, I want the React site, please make sure they fully understand the consequences of their decision. Tell them about the decoupled part. Tell them about the maintenance. Tell them about the different build systems. Tell them what they are going into. We definitely have a lot of customers that just think, oh, can't you just build it decoupled because I saw this really cool site that supposedly is decoupled? And then you say, yeah, of course we can. And then a half a year later, you're going to have shouting matches because you never really explained them, and they didn't have any understanding of what they're actually getting into. And the next thing is, and that's maybe something that we didn't do that well, make sure that your project managers, account managers, management, up to the management, everybody understands decoupled, that they understand what it actually means. Because these are the people at the end that are going to talk to the customer. They're going to, in cases where projects go overboard, go over money, or whatever happens, some failure in the project, these are the people that are going to have to explain to the customer what exactly happened. So make sure that these people also know everything about it, that they know what is different, what are the challenges, what is harder, what is easier. And the next thing is, include them in the learning process. Explain to them that what they want has never been done before. That it's not just a checkbox in a Drupal that has been implemented by the community. Explain them what it means to use a new tool. But also show them the opportunities that they have. And so luckily we were almost forced by this, because the first customers did that, but the later customers, we sometimes we even decided for them we're going to do it decoupled, and we didn't really want to tell them, and that showed to be a huge failure, because then you have projects and budgets and whatever. Then another interesting thing is most of our customers, they specifically require React, mostly because it is a bit understood as the enterprise framework, and mostly because a lot of companies behind it, Facebook, which is behind React. There was last year a huge problem with the licensing, but luckily this is all solved. So we have proper licenses that basically anybody can use it. But maybe explain them if your engineers say, well, this will be much better done with something else. Try to explain them again that there are different tools and they're very similar and stuff like that. Another interesting thing is that we now do projects where we, as the company or our team, just build the backend. So we just are responsible for all the content management, the editor experience, and the permission stuff. And another agency or another team actually implements the front end. So we've seen the designs that they use. We have seen the wireframes. We have seen all of this, but it's not implemented by us. And what we have basically is the GraphQL schema that sits in between is our contract with the teams. So we met the team on the other agency side. They actually told us the graphical schema that they expect from Drupal to return. We implemented that schema on our site, and we developed for multiple weeks and months. They had a mock server. That means they were able to, their front end talk to just like a little application that returned the schema, but they never talked to actually our Drupal. And one day we connected the two and the whole thing worked out of the box. But we both companies inherited so strongly to that contract, the schema, we were able to develop side by side with never needing to actually talk. Now, overall, I don't think it's the best way to do it that way, but it is possible. Now try to do that with a regular Drupal site. You will never be able. Like, who of you maybe had the case where somebody gave you a CSS and said, now please put that into your Drupal site? Nobody? Yeah, some cases, yes. So that was how in the past people thought, oh, I just use this PST to HTML thingy, and then just take these HTML files and slap it on Drupal on top of it. That's not how it works. This is now possible. If somebody builds you a front end in any JavaScript framework, gives you a GraphQL schema, you implement that schema in your GraphQL module in Drupal, it can talk to each other. And that's what we see, especially in bigger projects now working, that we as the Drupal specialists, we are used for the content management. And who actually consumes the APIs, we don't even know. They started to have other applications that talk to the GraphQL API, and we never talk to these people, but suddenly they have an iPhone app. So that's possible. Okay, let's talk a bit about the future. And this is a bit entwined between us and the whole Drupal community. So the question is definitely, where is it gonna end? Maybe if you asked me maybe a year or two ago, I would probably told you that we will do only decoupled in the future. Now I would say I'm a bit more hesitant in using that claim, because there is still a lot of things to figure out. Drupal as itself still brings a lot of functionality just out of the box. And I would definitely say it depends on the project sizes or the amount of money that can be invested. In smaller projects, it doesn't make sense to force decouple on top of it. You're going to be unhappy. There's going to be so much time is going to be spent to implement features that in Drupal would just be a click away. While in bigger projects, bigger sites, where the content, like we heard before from Todd, the content now needs to go to all these different places, I would never ever build a site with a Drupal frontend anymore, because you're just going to you're going to have a much better foundation from the very beginning. So I would say it really, really depends. For Drupal though, it's really important that we focus on the editor experience, because of all projects we lose today, it is because of the editor experience. We have pitches against Sitecore, Adobe Experience Manager, or whatever else, and a lot of times during these pitches, the customer wants to see the editor interface. And we have editors that see that and they ask us if we actually live behind the moon. Because for an editor point of view, the Drupal editing interface is like 10 years old, and it's literally 10 years old. And so that's a huge problem. And so what we actually do from Amazon Labs, we said we need to fix that. We want to have a better user experience. So we have our own project internally that we now work with multiple customers, that we work together and try to improve the editor experience, because we understand that the Drupal community itself, it's going to take them very, very long to do all of this. So we said, okay, we got to do it ourselves. It's completely open source. If you're interested, I'm happy to, or we have people here that use that. But that's one of the things. That's some cool thing that we were able to convince these customers, even though they didn't like the experience at all. We were able to convince them that they said, okay, let's work on it together and let's make the experience that your editors will very, very much like. And the other thing is we need to improve the APIs. Now they are already very good, but they can't do everything yet. So there's a lot of work that goes into improving JSON API, improving GraphQL, so that. Then one personal thing that we're working on is getting Gatsby and Drupal working. via GraphQL. So far, it was always via JSON API and converted it into GraphQL and whatever. It was a bit horrible. But so that's one other thing. And so we're thinking about using Gatsby the first time for customers and then explaining them again what a static site generator means, because that is a whole other topic. And with that, interestingly, we have the first questions around, do we actually still need Drupal? Because the part that Drupal provides is really great if you have editor workflows and permissions and roles and different access from data from different systems. Like we have sites where they talk to 3 different content aggregation, it takes it all in one, and it's really great. Like Drupal is awesome. We could not imagine using it for something else. But if you just have a site and you need to edit some content and you don't have crazy workflows and it's mostly 1 or 2 editors and you maybe have 3 menu entries, all of this can be done by software as a service tools out there that you don't have to worry about security updates, you don't have to worry about upgrading, you don't have to worry about uptime, you don't have to worry about training these people, because there are tools out there that do all of this. Now, I'm not saying we're going to go there, but I'm saying these are talks we're having now internally that, yeah, people say, well, we wouldn't need Drupal anymore, and at the end it is easier. And the cool thing is, if you keep, let's say, the GraphQL schema the same, if at one point you realize, oh, I'm not want to using this SAS editing tool anymore, I want to use Drupal, you can bring Drupal in, it talks the same APIs, done. So it is possible. Now, maybe next year we're going to have a talk about our first project without Drupal, we'll see. All right, that's pretty much it. Are there any questions? Yes?
Talk a little bit more about the SEO and server side, and is there a typical setup or is different?
So the question was about, to elaborate a bit more on the whole SEO and server-side rendering. So maybe from a technology point of view, to understand what it actually happens. If you don't have server-side rendering, what happens is the server, like the Drupal server, sends a JavaScript file to the browser and say, hey, browser, execute that JavaScript file, and in there is your whole website. So the structure, where parts is, where the menu is, and then that JavaScript talks to the server and says, okay, thank you for the JavaScript file, now give me the data. So it does additional requests to the server and gets the data out. So this expects the client side to be able to execute JavaScript. Now, in terms of crawlers, like the Googlebot and others, they can execute JavaScript, but there's not really a lot information around it, and there's a max, because it's very time consuming for them to execute your JavaScript. So basically you cannot depend on it. There are some people that use it, but I would not depend on it if it actually works. So what you do instead is you have a Node.js server running in your server infrastructure. When the browser goes and says, give me the website, mywebsite.com, the server itself will execute all the JavaScript first, will do all the rendering of the HTML and all that stuff, will also talk all the API calls, and send a fully rendered HTML, like we do it with Drupal, is sent to the browser and say, hey browser, this is your website. And that can be perfectly read by a screen reader or a spider or a bot. In this thing, in that website, is a small JavaScript file that says, if you can execute JavaScript, do it. That JavaScript will realize, oh, I already have a fully built site. So it will be, let's say, React starting up, and realize it's already there, and will convert the static site into a fully dynamic site. So if your browser, like your phone or your desktop computer, can execute JavaScript, the first request will be a fully built HTML site with some JavaScript in there. That JavaScript will start, and often on the second click, it will feel like a fully native React app. The user actually never realizes. For browsers or spiders that cannot do that, the JavaScript will never execute. If they click on a link, they will go back to the server and say, give me the site. The server does the whole thing. So that's the server-side rendering. So the first rendering happens on the server, and the fully built HTML CSS will be sent to the browser. And with that, you solve the crawler issue, because they don't need to execute JavaScript. And also any other devices, like screen readers, that maybe have JavaScript disabled, they will also solve that way. But for that, you need a server-side rendering. Now, to your question, how hard is this? If you use, like, so a lot of these, like React, has React itself, but React has a thingy called Next.js, which is basically a whole tool set around this server-side rendering and build scripts and all of that. And it's basically just a checkbox where you say, please do server-side rendering. So it's not something that your engineers have to learn how does all this merging, converting, and all of that has to work. That's pre-baked in these systems, and you can just use them. Other question? Yes?
What kind of challenges have you had with performance or perceived performance and how did you handle it?
So far, the websites have always been perceived as being much, much faster. And that's just because the site, all the logical stuff actually happens in the browser for the user directly. Plus, there's also some really cool things like, if you have a site, let's say you go to the front page of the site, and that means the API call that was done to Drupal and say, hey Drupal, give me the front end, all the content of the front page, that can be cached. So if you click on let's say on an article, and you read the article, and you click the browser back button, usually with a not decoupled site, your browser will go to the server and say, give me the front page, and then it also needs to render. Now, because the back and forwards button on your browser in your JavaScript application actually doesn't cause a whole reload, it just tells the application, hey, the user clicked on the back button. The application knows, oh, I've been on the front page before, just give me the content. Or like it will not talk to the Drupal anymore because it has it from before cached and will instantly show it. So like these things are much, much faster. So overall, I would say it is. If you have performance issues, though, they're harder to find. So we had cases where these API calls to Drupal, because if you tell Drupal, hey, Drupal, give me the whole front page, and the front page is maybe the last 10 news, who just signed up, breaking news, whatever, it's like a lot of content. And so all that content has to be generated by Drupal and be sent at one shot over to the browser. That can take very long. So then you need to think about caching in there. And I actually have a session tomorrow that talks about that, how the caching works. But I would say overall, it is faster by default. If you want to do it even faster, it's possible, but so far we were really happy with it. Yes?
You mentioned that you have a project going that improves the Drupal backend
Yes.
experience. Can you tell us what that's called?
It's called Silverback.
Okay.
So if you Google Amazing Lab Silverback, you will find some. So technically, the idea is that we're using CK Editor 5. Currently in core is CK Editor 4 in there, and with 5 they did a lot of improvements with like. Have you ever seen the Gutenberg thingy, how this works? So very similar things happen now in CK Editor 5. And so basically we're using that in Drupal for editors to like drag and drop and add and like create these content pages by themselves. But it's fully talking with Drupal, so it understands and it saves it in them in the correct way. It also works then with GraphQL and later on, all that stuff. And yeah, it's very, I would say, raw right now because we are in the development stages, but we have 3 or 4 customers of Amazing Labs are now working with that and improving features. And what is really cool, the customers know actually from each other that they all are chipping into one bigger tool. And I don't have any timelines, but it's going to be at one point that we say, okay, now it's installable on any site and you can use it. But if you Google Amazing Lab Silverback, and some of the maintainers are here, so I'm also happy to connect you to more of it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
What do you think is the future of the progressively decoupled approach?
What is the future of the progressively decoupled? I think it's just an intermediate step. It's a good place for engineers and agencies to play with it. Also for customers. Like we had one customer that they sell products. They say, let's say they have 500 different products. And to know which product is important for the customer is really hard, because showing them 500 products is going to be confusing. Now, what they used to have is an Drupal exposed filter where you can select, okay, I'm in the US and that. But the filtering, like on the left side, still you showed them a lot of products. Their user experience wasn't really great. So they came to us and said, hey, can we do a guided product navigator where we ask the customer questions? So in which country are you? This one. Okay, because they do like cell tower connection stuff. And then like, okay, how many devices do you need? How big is the device that you have? Like they ask you all these different kinds of questions, and after 5 questions, you press submit and it shows you 3 devices, and it's really easy for them to choose. Now we implemented that first in Drupal, so every time that you click on, let's say you click on the US, you wait, then it loads, tick, then it shows you, then you click the next question. So we implemented that in React, just this little thingy, and now the user goes tick, 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 because the logic, which products and which questions should be asked based on the history of the answers that the user already gave, is in React, baked in. It's in the browser. So when the user clicks US, it knows already which next questions to ask. So that goes really fast, and it shows them 3 products immediate. And so that was for us, a good learning that we realized, okay, we had the whole website, but we just wanted to solve that individual piece, and that was really great with Decoupled. And so that was a really good way to add it additionally. I don't think, though, that we will stay there, because now they tasted the blood of the speed of that can be. And now, of course, there's questions around, okay, how can we have a map where we show all our locations. How can we do that? Like, there's all these questions coming up. So maybe the next reiteration of the website is going to be fully decoupled. But I don't think it's something that I'm pretty sure it's almost impossible to just progressively decouple a site more and more and more and more, that at one point it's fully decoupled. But I think it's either an intermediate step, or it's always going to be a good solution for where it really makes sense. But in terms of the projects that we currently get faced with, they are either fully decoupled or they are too small that just keep it in Drupal. So I don't know. I know it's not the exact answer to your question, but I think it's mostly an intermediate step. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about the contract between backend and front-end team? Like, which tool do you use? How to track those changes in the contract? Because, like, for example, I have the same project right now. I have backend team, front-end team, and like I'm composing those contracts, and usually they are not final, so they're changing constantly.
Okay, so the question is around the contracts between 2 teams. How does this work? So far, we didn't have many projects of these, so I don't have like a huge amount of knowledge about it. But we had one case where the front-end team came to us and said, this is the GraphQL schema that we need. We already have running code, not 100% running code, but we have this code mostly done. So it wasn't really a negotiation, it was more like, implement me this. That worked really well. Mm-hmm. The problem actually was, on our side, that at that point, the GraphQL module was not really able to have a custom schema. So we implemented all these things that the GraphQL module can create a completely different schema. That's all there now. But basically it was just implementing based on a spec that was given to us. And yes, they had some changes, and we tracked them with just regularly meeting them, so having a good communication between these teams. But most of the stuff was done. Like, that was pretty much done, and that made a lot of things easier. So I would suggest to give one of the 2 teams saying, you define what you need. Now, in our case, I think it's easier if the front-end teams decide what they want. But if you have nothing, you could also, because Drupal comes with an existing schema, like in GraphQL in the module, there is an existing schema. So you can just show somebody, look, this is what we already have. But the GraphQL module makes it easier to change these or to adapt them slightly. Now we have another project where the 2 teams started from the very beginning. And schema changes are just pull requests, basically. So if one team needs a change, they send a pull request to the other one and say, hey, this is the change that we need. can you implement it? And then they go in. So it's a constant, like, just any other change of code where people interact with each other. And it's harder because you have changes all the time. But I think important is let the two teams that work together interact with each other. Like, don't try to be like the messenger in between. If you allow these teams to talk with each other, a lot of times they maybe also say, okay, can you do that change? And then the other team says, no, but that's really hard. And then there is communication between the teams, and suddenly they maybe realize, okay, no, actually we don't need to change at all. So, yeah. So overall, either give one team the allowance that they define it, and the other team just implements it, or have them really closely communicating together.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are you doing all your schema transforms from Drupal with the module? Are you doing any other sources to match into that with microservices, or how are you getting all that into the GraphQL?
So the question is is the schema always 100% from Drupal, or do we have other data sources? Yeah, so what you're talking about is schema stitching, which is a feature that was from beginning existing in GraphQL, not widely used, and I think that's happening right now, where technically GraphQL itself could actually talk to a lot of data points and to GraphQL again, and the stitching is the part that you take multiple GraphQLs together and make a bigger GraphQL or greater schema. Right now, all the projects we have is the data that the Drupal, let's say the Drupal has external data, we cannot in real time talk to these APIs over there, because these are like editorial systems that are sometimes even down while the website needs to run all the time. So what happens is Drupal uses the migrate framework to talk to these external systems, import the data in Drupal in regular nodes, and then send them out. Yes.
Okay.
So there is another system that it's one of the amazing customers. What they use is external external entities external. So there's a module in Drupal that you can teach Drupal about an external system, and in Drupal they will arrive just as regular entities, and behind Drupal does API calls all the time, and then GraphQL just talks entity API, so it will work in real time. So Drupal then does the stitching in real time. You just need to make sure that the external API is there all the time. Or the last thing that we see now more and more happening is you actually add an Apollo server in between the front end and the Drupal. That Apollo server talks with the GraphQL of Drupal, talks with GraphQL or anything else of another, gets let's say weather data is a good example. You want to show on your website weather data. The weather data is not coming, Drupal has no idea what the weather is like, so you have an external API. So the Apollo server sits in between. If it needs weather data, it talks to the weather API. If it needs Drupal content data, it talks to the Drupal. But for the front end, it looks as one GraphQL that can content and weather at the same time. So that's definitely something that happens more and more. Apollo server is really great in all this stitching. I would say though that's then the next level, because the problem is debugging again. If your weather is gone, who do you ask? Because who built the Apollo server? And in Drupal it's very easy because Drupal people know how to debug Drupal and solve problems there. So Apollo server and all that stuff is definitely great. Having everything in Drupal sometimes it's just much easier, I would say. So I think it really depends on how good is your team, how well versatile are they with all these systems, because I've definitely seen projects where you have 10 microservices and something goes wrong and nobody has a clue what's happening. And people spend hours searching in the wrong microservice. So it can be dangerous and just take a lot of time to solve problems. Okay, we're over time. I'm still here the whole today, so if you have more questions, don't hit me.